Coming to you live from lockdown tonight. It's my first time doing that for more than a year. I've spent the past few weeks in South Australia and Victoria and had last week off, actually, as you know. Thanks so much for Chris Smith and James Morrow for hosting the show so effectively last week. And thank you to continue to support the show in such great numbers. But I found myself in the strange situation on the weekend in Melbourne, in Freedom, deciding whether to head back to Sydney and into lockdown. Lockdowns, as you know, are miserable, damaging and soul-destroying. Most of them have been unnecessary, including this one in Sydney now. But anyway, here I am. Sydney is home and I'm in now, and like 5 million others, I'm stuck here until governments either decide they've met their zero COVID aims or they come to their senses. The point is that this is an overreaction. We should not be locked down like this. Just as Victoria's harsh and extended lockdown was over the top last year and they faced a much more serious situation for all kinds of reasons, this is too much now as well. Remember, we've demonstrated with the experts on this program that the lockdowns imposed in Adelaide, Perth twice, Brisbane twice and Melbourne twice over the past 8 months were unnecessary. The data shows they were tiny outbreaks that were brought under control without the lockdowns actually adding to the contact tracing efforts. In Sydney, this outbreak is different. It's much more widespread. It's raced ahead of the contact tracers. But we're still talking about infections in the main. We're still frightening people rather than talking about living with a virus that we will eventually have to live with. Now, we heard the figures again today. More than 70%, nearly 3/4 of all Australians over 70 years of age have had a vaccination shot, and more than half of the over 50s. So we're in an infinitely better position than even Victoria was last year, not to mention any of the other countries who went through hell over the past 18 months. No matter what happens, we will never experience the worst of this pandemic. That's great news. With all of those over 70 who want a vaccine having one, we simply can't face the dire consequences that we've seen in other countries. Even in Victoria last year, where there were sadly 800 people who died, 80% of them were in aged care settings. These vulnerable people are now vaccinated in Sydney and across the nation. This is terrific news. We've got far less to worry about. There's been one death in this Sydney outbreak, the first death in this country from a locally acquired COVID infection for the entire year. This was a 90-year-old unvaccinated woman. No government policy, no face mask rule, no lockdown, no vaccine rollout can protect a 90-year-old who chooses, for whatever reason, not to be vaccinated. Now, every passing is sad, but really, most people in most countries of the world would love to walk the streets of Sydney today and face the risk that exists here now. But what do our politicians do? They peddle fear. Great. So we show an actress playing a young woman extremely ill from COVID, even though young, healthy adults are extremely unlikely to get that ill. They can, of course, just to be super clear, but it is extremely rare. And they suggest in the ad that people like that should get vaccinated, even though the under 40s are not part of the general vaccine rollout, precisely because the threat to them is so low compared to the elderly. We have governments peddling fear when fear is the problem here, not the solution. It's fear of blood clotting from AstraZeneca, overstated by the authorities, but blamed for the death of a 72-year-old in South Australia today. It's that fear that's created strife for the vaccine rollout, and now we see silly ad campaigns heightening fears about coronavirus as well. Calm resolve is what's needed here. Facts, rational approaches, and dealing with a public health challenge that will last many more years. Not panic, fear, lockdowns and the like. Once we were going to slow the spread, remember, and flatten the curve. And that makes sense. That's a challenge we should all embrace by following advice like this.
I think the key point, and I can't be clearer than this in my public health advice if I take off the mask, I can't be clearer that there is the orders and there are what we're expecting the community to do. We absolutely need to minimise our contact with anyone. And just to stress that, even if you're going to get a coffee at a takeaway and you know that you're going to be within 1.5 metres, you need to wear a mask. This is absolutely critical at this point in time that we minimise at all our contact with anyone else. I think that is a simple message, and everyone has a role to play in achieving that outcome, because otherwise this disease will continue to spread and have a tragic consequence for those that are most nearest and dearest to you, including your friends and closest family.
Well, that was Dr. Kerry Chant today once she got rid of that pesky mask, and she explained this. That sure is what we need to do. But instead, they impose rules, lockdowns, border closures. They send police out on patrols. They ban browsing in shops, stop kids from going to school. And they portray the virus as if it's an evil enemy with a mind of its own.
My strong message to the community of Fairfield is this virus is targeting your families and your friends. It's effectively using family and friends to betray other family and friends by getting the virus into those households. Please be aware, right now, Fairfield is the target of this virus in particular. So make sure through every measure you avoid passing it on to your family, your friends. The only measure that will work is to stay at home. Just stay at home.
It's targeting us now. It's targeting Fairfield. It targeted other suburbs earlier. Really, this stuff is mindless. No wonder people are cowering in fear of either the disease or the vaccines or both. And so we end up with lockdowns aimed at achieving zero community transmission. This can never be a permanent achievement. We're going to end up living with the disease one day. Nothing's more certain. We can't avoid that. The question is why we're not closer to doing that now. With all the elderly who want a vaccine having one, with more than half of those over 50 in the same boat, and with the rollout continuing at a rate of more than 100,000 people a day. Yet we locked down 5 million people. We are victims of our own success. We are pretending we can make this go away forever. We're in a better position than almost every country on the planet, yet we insist on making it harder for ourselves. And we look at spending more borrowed money to hide under the doona.
Obviously, what we announce in the next few days will have a mind on supporting businesses potentially for a longer period, depending on how long the lockdown lasts. And can I say this? New South Wales has done its work. We're in negotiations with the Commonwealth, and we hope to have something to say in the next few days.
Oh yeah, spend more money to pay for unnecessary lockdowns. Someone will have to pay eventually. The young of today, that's who. The young who are not under such serious threat will have to repay all of this, even though the elderly of today are largely protected by vaccines already. Yet none of our government leaders are talking about this. Scott Morrison's plan, announced just the other week, said lockdowns should be used only as a last resort. A last resort? Sydney is locked down and the nation is dislocated with border closures, with fewer than 70 people in hospital in New South Wales, 20 of them seriously ill. Given the nature of this disease, what other nations are still living with, how our elderly are already protected, can we really call this situation a last resort? We've got to formally abandon the zero community transmission goal, surely. This zero COVID goal is unsustainable. We need to get back to flattening the curve, making sure we can cope with the level of infections around us. If you told us a year ago we could be in such a brilliant position with a low death toll, relatively normal lifestyles, with massive health capacity untapped, economic growth continuing along, and crucially, vaccines available to all, we would not have believed our luck. Sure, we need social distancing and we need isolation for the infected and a range of measures to contain the spread of this COVID-19 virus, but locking down millions of people while the rest of the world opens up, this is not progress. It's time to take advantage of our good pandemic management, not be held prisoner by it.